All right. Hello, everyone. We are standing between you and the break, so no pressure. So, as Barb said, I'm Jen Bankard with the BTN Group. Had the pleasure to be with some of you yesterday. Excited to be back here again today. I have a little bit of presentation, and then I'm really excited to bring Barb C. and Natalie into the conversation and get some real-world examples in terms of what's happening with policy within the world travel customer base. But if you'll humor me for just a minute. So I am really fascinated by ChatGPT, and I use it to entertain myself sometimes. I'm a history geek and a musical theater geek, so I was like, we're in the Hamilton Hotel, right? How great is this? So last night, I was like, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to write me a short travel policy in the style and voice of Alexander Hamilton. And it gave me something really cool. However, I'm going to change things up. Erica, I loved hearing from your daughter. So after we heard from Carolina, I sat at my table and I asked for ChatGPT to give me a very short, just a few sentences, travel policy that will appeal to Gen Z employees and travelers. And here's what it gave me. Our travel policy is all about flexibility, choice, and sustainability. Book what works best for you, whether it's eco-friendly options or staying connected on the go. We've got tools to make booking easy and transparent so you can stay in control and make decisions that fit your style while keeping costs in check. Oh, and we're serious about minimizing our environmental impact so you can feel good about traveling smarter. So I just thought that was kind of cool. So as I said, I've got just a little bit of presentation, and then I'll, like I said, I'll bring Barb and Natalie into the conversation. So this may be my favorite travel policy. It's Netflix's travel policy. You can find this out on the website. It's 5 words. Act in Netflix's best interest. I'm fascinated by this, right? And so we'll dive into this idea of short and simple policies. Maybe this is like the extreme, but I think it's really interesting that they want, your employees want to do the right thing, and so let's empower them, let's entrust them, and let's trust them, but let's set them up for success. I know this session was titled, building a robust travel policy and going beyond the basics, but I would posit that you actually need to go back to the basics to build a robust travel policy. And you have to keep that in mind, because no matter what is happening in the industry, whether it is NDC or sustainability or the convergence of travel and meetings, if you have a good foundation in place, and as Barb, you said, and you're reviewing it regularly, you'll really set yourself up for success and will be able to incorporate changes as the industry continues to evolve. So just a few policy trends that I'd like to share. So this is from BTN's 2024 Small and Mid-Size Market Survey. We know that 48% of organizations are managing travel more closely, and 21% have tightened policy. AV team, can I ask a favor? Can you make the slides bigger so that I can see them? I don't have notes in there. Are you able to adjust that? If not, it's no big deal. I'm juggling 3 things. Talented, but I'm not that talented. That is amazing. Thank you so much. Are we able to make the current slide? We've got the next slide. That's okay. I'll make it work. And then we know that, so the next slide then is from a paper that BTN partnered with MasterCard on. And this is really interesting in terms of how has policy changed the most? And there's just a few that I want to highlight. So we know that 47% identified that they've tightened policy to simplify choice and drive savings. I do find that term simplified choice to be interesting. I almost wonder if that actually means to limit choice. I'm not really sure, but that's just something that I thought of. And then we see 44% simplified and shortened. Perhaps not to the degree of Netflix's policy, but shorter policies certainly are a trend. I thought it was really interesting that we saw that almost a third have aligned their policies with the change in NDC. But what I found really interesting is that 26% actually loosened their policies to give greater employee choice on how and what they book. So again, it's about empowering and trusting your travelers because most of the time they will make the right decision. But again, we've got to create a policy that gets them there. A few trends within the SME market, because I know a lot of you do work for companies that have smaller programs. You know, as companies are in growth mode, developing policy can actually be a little tricky. Because if you have policies that are designed to limit travel and have perhaps things like remote conferencing mandates, that might actually conflict with your company's culture, when the culture is all about growth. And so if you're not allowing people to travel or meet in person, you potentially risk, morale issues, productivity issues. But on the flip side, you also don't want a free-for-all. So there's just lots of considerations. I think the other thing in, especially the startup space, tech space, professional services, is there is such competition for talent. And so again, that travel policy can potentially be a determining factor as to whether or not someone decides to take a job with your company as opposed to someone else's company. This is just a smattering of, just a few of the things that are impacting our industry today, just a few that I want to touch on. We're going to talk about sustainability and some other things later. Blended travel, this was again something Barb touched on. We know that we're probably all doing it. So let's not even just talk about our employees and our travelers. We are probably all combining work with leisure travel at times. But going back to that risk piece, if you haven't taken the time to address this in travel policy, you do risk. There's financial implications. There's certainly just issues with do we know people are? And so if you haven't yet tackled that, now is absolutely the time to do so. What's really interesting is some companies that are a little more forward-thinking have actually extended their corporate rates for personal use. They actually allow personal travel to be booked through corporate channels. And there's some really interesting new technologies out there that actually allow for payment to be split between corporate and personal, so you can really keep those expenses separate as well. Lots of efforts being focused on accessibility these days, which I think is fantastic. We want to make travel as inclusive as possible and as easy as possible for all of our employees, no matter what their needs are. And then certainly, as we think about the different generations and what is important to them. So I want to do a quick poll. So if everyone wants to grab their phone, and so while we're doing this poll, I want to turn to Barb and get some insights from her. So I'm just curious. Oh, I forgot to log into Slido. That's such a rookie mistake. See, this is what happens when I go to someone else's event and not my own event. That's okay. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this the way Linda did it. Everyone stand up. Just gonna pivot. Okay. I would like you to sit down if your policy has been updated, your travel policy has been updated within the past year at your company. Ooh. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I would not have expected that. This is great. You all get gold stars, don't we agree? Okay.
Absolutely.
Next, sit down if it's been 2 to 5 years since your travel policy's been updated. All right, only a few people left standing. Okay, so more than 5, so 5 to 10? Anyone longer than 10? All right, everyone can sit down. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that we have such a great audience that is really on top of travel policy. So Barb, we heard about your fantastic cab earlier from Erica.
Yep.
And I know you've had some conversations with them around travel policy, trends that they're seeing, what's important to them and what's important to their customers. Can you share a little bit about what the CAB has told you about travel policy lately?
Yeah, we talked to our client advisory board, and we also talked to I went to the account managers over the past few weeks and said, you know, what in policy, what are we looking at? What are we looking to change and really address? And right now there's a lot more mandating the program than before. I think a lot of it came out of the past few years with COVID, and they want to know where their travelers are. At all times, because look at just what's been happening the past couple of weeks with all the hurricanes, and it really makes everybody think, where are all of our people at all times? We also are starting to see more caps on hotels and per diems are being added into the policies. So that has been a little bit of a switch that we're starting to see more concentration on the hotels. And then the third one is approval process. We are seeing a big change in getting more and more management approval for their travel. So, which brings us into some of our tools that we have that we can offer to our customers.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely turn to Natalie in a minute here to talk about some of that technology and product support. So, again, going back to basics, as you think about policy, whether you're creating a policy from scratch, whether you're just doing it's time to do a complete overhaul, or whether you're doing a refresh, we have to remember that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to any travel policy. And so this is just a list of questions to consider as you're doing that policy development or policy review. And I think there's a few of these, especially this first one, that is so very important. Your policy needs to match your company's goals. And I would actually add to that, it needs to match your company's culture. And as long as your policy is reflective of that company culture, this company goals, the rest will follow. And then your travel policy will be well suited for your employees and your travelers. I have just a few interesting anecdotes, sort of on both sides of the coin. One of the issues that BTN puts out every year is around the companies that are part of the Corporate Travel 100, so sort of the top spenders in North America. And they share tidbits of information with us about where they are with their program. So this is public, I'm not calling anyone out. I found it really interesting. So the United Nations is saying that it's going to be updating its 10-year-old travel policy this year. Like, that's a really long time and you think about the United Nations, right? You know, that's gotta be a pretty complex travel program. So 10 years. Now on the flip side, I thought was really cool, so the pharmaceutical company Bayer, they have a new CEO and a new operating model, which is called dynamic shared ownership. I don't know what that means, but that's what they told us. So their 2024 policy review is going to be in line with this dynamic shared ownership model. And so I thought that that's such a perfect example of matching the travel policy to the company culture and company goals. So we see the whole spectrum within the industry. So I think the other thing to consider and why it's so important to think about goals is you need to find out the why before the how. So before you even think about the nitty-gritty of policy stipulations and who your preferred vendors are going to be, especially if you're at a company that's just scaling up your program, you would really do well to consider those goals and objectives first, and then move into that nitty-gritty of the operational and management piece of it next. And then I think the very last bullet point, how forceful should the policy be, gets us into this idea of, do you have a mandated culture or do you have a guideline culture? And again, there's a place for both. And again, this is why you need to develop a policy that's reflective of your organization's culture. So when it comes to mandates versus guidelines, the majority of companies do mandate that travelers follow policy or risk consequences. However, I always find this so fascinating. So this again was from the paper we did with MasterCard, and this kind of pulled out some specific mandates. So 3/4 of the travel decision makers mandated use of a preferred booking tool and preferred lodging. However, less than 40% of the travelers said that it was mandated. But almost all of them claim to have a high degree of familiarity with their company's policies. So travelers think they know the policy. They don't think certain things are mandated, but they are. So there's this gap. And I think this is then where we get into what we like to refer to as compliance issues, right? So we either have people just like not following the policy, going outside of policy, or so. Barb, I want to get into some of these sort of real life situations because we've got the policy and then we've got the reality of the situation. So can you first share with us what are some of the best practices that your team, the account management team, communicates to customers around designing policy so that travelers will not only remember the policy, but also follow the policy?
Often, with getting sign off on your policy as well. So a lot of times we have a new employee come in to the company, you give them the travel policy, you know they're going to travel, you get them all the travel information they need, and you have them sign off on that policy. They need to make sure that they've read it. One of our customers, and I'm pretty sure they're here, they actually give them a test. So they make them read it, and if they don't test, they don't get their corporate credit card. So they have to pass. So they're just making sure that everybody understands what is written in that policy. It's not just a set of, hey, here's the words. You need to live by it. We want to know where you are. We want to know what you're doing. You're also spending our company money, so take that into consideration. So that is one of the main things is really they have to read it. Like you said, so many of them don't read it. They have no idea what is out there.
Right.
And then really go speak to your account managers of what's the best practices out there today, because things have changed over, with NDC out there, and the hotels is really still where there's a really large leakage of hotels. And I know we're going to go into it. I have a quick example of one client on how they really mandated their policy around their hotels.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into that. So I would love to hear, that specific example of how you've really helped someone kind of overcome that barrier to adoption.
So we have a client that has been with us for about 6-7 years, and they have a very large hotel spend. And they, when they came on board, they were doing about $5 million in hotel alone, but they knew they had a very large leakage out there. So they went and purchased Concur Expense. We helped them through their policy, and they are now, and since January, and they put Hotel Shopping Bot into play. They are now over $11.5 million in hotel, and they are now capturing all of it. And through their expense, they don't only have to say that they show their receipts, they also have to show their itinerary that shows they booked their hotel through World Travel, or they will not get reimbursed. So they also put Hotel Shopping Bot into place, and they have now $95,000 year to date in savings that they brought through our Hotel Shopping Bot. So it's a really good story because they're so proud of their hotel program, because that is where, and their people are in the oil industry, and they need to know where they are at all times, especially during the hurricane season. That they need to be able to call us, and we move them around the country to make sure that they're out of harm's way.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that example. And I'm curious about a couple things. First of all, like the cost savings is amazing. So I'm sure then, major kudos to the travel manager. Senior leadership probably loves that. I'm curious about the piece of we're not going to reimburse you if you don't book within channel. And some companies have gone to that extreme, and it is very effective. But we often talk about the carrot versus the stick approach, and that is a little bit more of a stick approach.
They really went with the stick approach because there was so much missing.
Can you share maybe what was behind that? Aside from the fact that there was just so much that was missing, like, does that align with the company culture? Was that a hard transition for the employees to make?
No, I think they changed their policy in a couple of different ways, but because of what they do, it was really hard for them to manage where their people were during the hurricanes, especially. They're based on the Gulf Coast, So they would have to move people, and their executive office is in Houston, and they also have a location in Denver. So they have to move all of their executives, everybody out of Houston when a storm is coming, and moving them to Denver, which is where their second office is. So they really rely on world travel, because we're there for them 24/7 during a hurricane season, that we have people dedicated to them.
All right.
So it is a good program. And I would like Natalie just to mention a little bit about how that hotel shopping bot went into place for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So our hotel shopping bot is a great solution to help achieve savings for a hotel program. Also a great way to encourage travelers to book hotel within the program. We know some of the times the perception is that they're getting better rates by going out to the consumer websites directly. But with our shopping tool solution, it provides the confidence that they're going to get the absolute best rate, not only at the time that they book the trip, but anytime up until that cancellation policy. So being able to leverage some of those changing market rates and take advantage of those.
Great, and that's such a specific example, and I love how it applies to hotel, and again, it gives the travelers that confidence that if I do book within the program, I'm still going to get the best price, because honestly, that's why people are going out of channel, right? Because they want to find, I found it cheaper, and they think that they're doing a good thing. They don't always think about that safety piece. Natalie, how else from a technology perspective do you work to support customers with their policy development, their policy implementation?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of opportunity for technology to help enforce policy by really influencing traveler behavior. So, if you start at the very beginning where a booking is occurring, there's options right within the online booking tool for custom messaging to help drive the right behavior. If you want to go a step further, there's even overlays for the online booking tools where you can get even more granular with the data points being presented to travelers so they can make the best possible decision. Even going as far as budgets, perhaps, so that for that specific itinerary, what's a reasonable amount of money that should be spent on that particular trip? Like Barb mentioned, there's also approval workflows, and we've seen, I think, our customers become more mindful in how those are applied. We used to see where everything required approval. And I think that it almost numbs the approvers then to those that it really should be looked at. So being more mindful about what approvals are sent for so that it's truly calling out those outliers of the policy and not just, if you want to put eyes on it, we can copy people on the itineraries. So.
All right. So several of the things that both of you mentioned have to do with policy communication. And so again, this is just some high-level trends that we've seen. So majority of companies are using either internet sites, enterprise communication tools to share information about policy. A little over 60% are embedding policies and processes into online booking tools or expense tools. And kind of to reinforce what you said, Barb, we're even seeing people start to test people on the travel policy. And I like that idea of dangling, you can't get your credit card until you pass the test. In terms of how did the time go by so quickly? But when we asked travelers what would make life easier for them, overall, shorter, simpler policies with less jargon. They want policies to be easy to find, but I thought this one was really interesting. They want reminders in booking tools that options are out of policy, yet we also know that the majority of companies are putting policy information in booking tools, so I just wonder, is that just like another example of there's just that little bit of a gap? Do you have a comment on that, Natalie?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any comment around that?
I do think that maybe it's something that is desired, but maybe we haven't seen it come all the way through. Also, just the how that information is presented in the online booking tool, that's something to be considered as well. Like, is it something that's very prominent and easy for the traveler to see, or is it maybe something that's not standing out as much to them?
Especially if it's a change in the policy, that's a fresh change, you can put it into your company notes page into Concur.
Yeah, absolutely. So just going to skip over, I had another poll, but clearly we know I didn't log into Slido. So this is probably where we really want to get into things. So yesterday I presented some global travel trends, and I think a few of these definitely have an impact on today's policy. So sustainability, I did refer to it as modern airline retailing, but we can call it NDC, and hotel program management. So Barb, I want to focus on air travel specifically for a minute. So historically, booking air travel was based on the concept of lowest logical airfare. Do you think that idea of lowest logical airfare still makes sense in the current environment when we have things like sustainability, things like NDC, things like traveler wellness? How does that play into?
So far, we have not seen too many changes on that, so it still is lowest logical fare. But what they are pretty much is making you travel smarter. So if you're buying a ticket, you know you're going to change. Don't buy the most restrictive ticket. Also, trying to combine trips into one. So instead of going out tomorrow, for one meeting and then the next week to another trip, try to combine those trips together. But that's still going in with try to get the lowest logical airfare. And then NDC is definitely playing a part into that as well.
Do you have any specific examples of how policies have been adjusted because of the NDC environment?
Prior to American Airlines changing theirs a little bit, we were I had to say that. So we were, policies were looking at NDC, we were, comparing against, but then they also had to check against their policies. So we were making changes on some of our customers, we're putting into NDC into effect. But now it's back to let's getting the best airfare, but also making sure it does allow them to make some changes and do name changes, things like that.
Well, that's good. And as Laurie said earlier, right now NDC is primarily being driven by price. We're not yet to that piece of the bundles and the dynamic offers. But I think we have to admit that there are some contradictions that exist right now between, again, just being driven by schedules and cost only versus keeping into account what is the, how can I travel and have, the lowest carbon emissions on my route? How can I focus on my traveler's wellness? And so I think the conversation perhaps is turning, and I think you even sort of made reference to this, it's what's logical, reasonable for that particular trip?
That trip, right. And sustainability is out there. Our clients are looking at it, but it's still not a driver yet, except to try to combine your trips. Yeah. I think that is where, but they do want to see the reports, they want to see the carbon reports, we are getting that for them, but I don't think that's making the decision is to buy an airline ticket due to the carbon right now.
Sure.
That's coming.
Yeah. So just one more question for Barb, and then I want to transition and get some closing thoughts from the both of you. So another change in the industry is really a shift towards dynamic hotel rates. Buyers are still somewhat uncertain about negotiating dynamic rates because it's really challenging to forecast the actual cost. Are you seeing that trend impact your customers' policies at all?
I spoke to Laura, who's here with our hotel consulting group. So Laura, raise your hand. So yes, we are seeing it, but if you have a really strong policy, you can avoid the dynamic hotel pricing. And what we are trying to do is if there's five hotels in that property, in that city that you're going to, we are trying to make sure we're staying away from the dynamic, or at least put a ceiling on the dynamic pricing. But again, I think that goes into what we were saying. We're seeing more and more customers putting caps in per diems on the hotels to try to stay away from the dynamic. And Laura, has said to me, just make sure you say they got to have a strong policy about hotels. So Laura, I put it out there for you.
All right. She followed through.
I followed through. So yeah, so I think we are seeing that is definitely out there, but we are trying to avoid them if possible on the dynamic and try to get static pricing.
All right, well, while I would love to keep the conversation going, we do need to wrap up. So Natalie, I want to go over to you and just give you an opportunity to share, maybe do you have like a specific change or a call to action to your customers related to travel policy that you might like to share?
So I'd just like to encourage all of you to go back, take a look at your travel policy as it is today, compare it against the data that you have, right? So use our World Analytics reporting, use your expense reporting. If you're using any sort of like third-party consolidator, look at those numbers and identify an opportunity to make a change that could be really impactful for your organization and make yourself look really good too. and then come to World Travel, work with us to embed some of the technology that we talked about today to help make that goal more achievable. I think it's wonderful to have opportunities to do training with employees, and I love the concept of you have to take a test to get your credit card. That's awesome. I think that's fantastic, but it's at one point in time, and as an employee goes through longevity with an organization, some of that information I think can be more easily lost. So let's find ways to embed those reminders and keep everybody on task.
Fantastic. And Barb, call to action suggestion you want to share?
Really talk to your account management team. They're out, most of them are here, but you all know who your account manager is. And we're going into a new year, so we are going to be looking, the team is going to be going out, talking about trends that we're seeing. And really, let's tighten up your policy. Let's take a look at it, because I was always surprised at how many people have just looked at it, because I was going to say, well, look, you haven't looked at it in 5 years. This be the time. But a lot of you have already done that. But it's always ways to enhance it.
Absolutely. So just as we close out, I want to share a few quick resources with you from the BTN group. First and foremost, our corporate travel index. If you want to benchmark your current program against what else is happening in the industry, we, on a quarterly basis, update hotel rates, ground transportation, and meals, as well as safety readings for over 200 cities around the world. If you scan that QR code, that'll take you to the index. We also have our BTN Academy. So this is I want to emphasize this part, it's a free online, on-demand learning destination for anyone who's involved with business travel on the buy side or the supplier side. So certainly tied to the conversation we were having today. Courses on structuring a managed travel program and establishing a T&E policy, as well as many other things. And then lastly, one of the things that we just recently launched within the past few months was what we call our BTN communities. And these are quarterly online meetings that we have just for buyers. There are no suppliers or consultants that are able to attend these calls. And we have 4 groups right now, one on NDC, one on sustainability, one on technology, and then one dedicated to the small and mid-sized market. So certainly if that's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to sign up. It's been really positively received so far. So with that, thank you all so much for your time.
Yes,
thank you, Barb. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
And thank you, World Travel, for having me. So enjoy the rest of your day.